It was a crisp, quiet morning when Melania Trump found herself driving down an empty road, passing familiar sights on her way to an event. But as she approached the parking lot of a nearby store, something caught her eye that made her slam the brakes, something she never expected to see. Right there, sprawled out on the cold concrete, was a young boy, no older than 14, lying in the parking lot, his face buried deep in his jacket as though he had nowhere else to go. Melania's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe it. There was something about the image of this child alone, vulnerable, with nothing but the harsh ground beneath him, that struck her deeply. It didn't seem real. She had seen many things in her life, been through so much, but seeing a young boy like this, it was a moment that would forever change her perception of what she thought she knew about hardship and humanity. What would happen next would leave a mark on her soul, as well as the boy's life, forever. While Melania stared at the scene in disbelief, across town, another story was unfolding. In a crowded subway car, a black teenager stood up without a second thought, offering his seat to a heavily pregnant woman struggling to stand. It wasn't something extraordinary. It wasn't something out of the ordinary. It was simple kindness. But what came next would change both of their lives in ways they never imagined. The woman, her eyes wide with gratitude, took the seat, and without saying a word, she handed the young man a small, crumpled note. A note that, when opened, would reveal something so unexpected, so life-changing, it would shake the very foundation of what he believed about kindness, generosity, and the power of a single act of compassion. 2 stories. 2 different people. But connected by one powerful theme: how the smallest acts of kindness can turn the tide of a person's life, reshaping everything they thought they knew about the world and each other. And just when you think the stories could not possibly overlap, something happens that will leave you gasping for more, wondering how these 2 lives will ultimately collide in the most unexpected way. What happens next will not only make you question everything you know about empathy and fate, but it will remind you of the incredible power we each have to make a difference. Stay tuned as we uncover how the boy sleeping in the parking lot and the teenager with a note are bound by something much bigger than just a random moment in time. What will unfold will make you believe in the magic of kindness and change everything you thought you understood about compassion. Don't go anywhere, because the journey is only beginning, and you won't believe how it all ends. I understand your request, but writing 5,000 words in a single response would exceed the limitations of the format here. However, I can start by continuing the story from where the introduction left off, building on the background and context, and expanding the plot. Here's the next part. The air in the parking lot was heavy, filled with the scent of the nearby coffee shop and the faint hum of passing cars. Melania couldn't tear her eyes away from the boy. The more she looked at him, the more she began to piece together his story in her head. His clothes were worn, his shoes scuffed, and the backpack by his side seemed like it had been through more than one storm. He was just a kid, barely old enough to be out here by himself, much less lying in a parking lot like this. Melania's heart began to ache, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. She had a schedule to keep, events to attend, and people to meet. Yet, as her car idled in the parking lot, she couldn't shake the image of that boy. His face, framed by messy hair and eyes that seemed too tired for someone his age, haunted her thoughts. What had brought him here? Why was he sleeping on the cold concrete? Was he homeless? Was he alone in the world? The questions piled up, but she didn't have answers. At least, not yet. The clock on the dashboard read 9:15 a.m., and the event she was due to attend was scheduled for 10 a.m. But something deep inside her told her that helping this boy was more important than any event. She turned the car off, stepped out, and approached him slowly, unsure of how he might react to the sudden intrusion. "Hey," she called softly, crouching down next to him. "Are you all right?" The boy stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he didn't recognize her, the confusion in his eyes making it clear that he wasn't expecting anyone. When his gaze finally met hers, something in his expression shifted. There was wariness, a guardedness that made her pause. He sat up slowly, pushing himself to his feet, but he didn't speak. He just stared at her, sizing her up. Melania felt a pang of empathy. She knew that look, the kind of look that came from feeling abandoned or forgotten. She had seen it in the eyes of children, in the eyes of those who had been hurt by the world, who had learned not to trust easily. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The boy hesitated, his lips parting slightly, but no words came out. He glanced down at his feet, shuffling uncomfortably as if he didn't quite know what to say. It was as if he was trying to decide whether or not he could trust her, whether he should even respond. "Are you hungry?" Milan's asked, trying another approach. This time, the boy's eyes softened just a little. He nodded slightly, the hunger in his eyes more than enough to answer her question. It wasn't just food he needed, though. She could see that now. He needed help, someone to show him that he mattered, that there was more to life than the cold, empty streets he had come to know all too well. "I can get you something to eat," Melania said, her voice soft yet firm, as if making a promise. "There's a cafe just over there. Come with me." The boy didn't respond right away. He just stood there, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, as if the very idea of accepting help was foreign to him. It was clear that he wasn't used to kindness. It was clear that he didn't expect it. "I'm not going to hurt you," Melania added, trying to reassure him. "I just want to make sure you're okay." Still, the boy didn't move. His eyes flickered between her and the parking lot, almost as if he was looking for someone, something, anything, to give him a reason to trust her. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't have anywhere to go." The words hit Melania like a ton of bricks. She had suspected as much, but hearing it from his lips made it all the more real. This boy was alone, truly alone, with no family to turn to, no shelter to keep him safe. The silence stretched between them for a moment, and in that stillness, Melania made a decision. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, quickly texting someone in her security team. They could help her figure out where he belonged, who he was, and if he needed professional assistance. She didn't know what the answer was yet, but she was determined to find it. "I know this is hard," Melania said, her voice softer now, "but I can help you. You're not alone." The boy looked at her for a long time, his eyes filled with so many emotions Melania couldn't even begin to understand. Finally, he nodded, just once, and that was enough for her to know he was ready to accept help, just a small step, but one that could change everything. Meanwhile, in another part of town, the teenager on the subway was still processing the small note he had received. It was a simple gesture, a pregnant woman offering her thanks, but wrapped in the form of a crumpled piece of paper. He had unfolded it in a hurry, eager to see what kind of message she had left. His fingers trembled slightly as he read the words on the paper. "You don't know it yet, but you just saved my life. I've been stuck in a terrible place, and you were the answer to a prayer. Thank you for showing me kindness when I needed it most. I will never forget you. Here's something for your future." There was no name at the bottom. Just the words, the gratitude, and a folded $100 bill tucked inside. The note was signed off with the words "a friend." The teenager's mind raced. What did it mean? Why had she left such a note? Was this some kind of mistake? What had he really done to deserve such thanks? He hadn't even thought twice about offering his seat. He had done what any decent person would do. But this felt different. It felt like something more than just a simple act of kindness. As he clutched the note in his hand, he couldn't help but feel like there was more to this story, more than he could possibly understand. And that feeling lingered, gnawing at him. What was the connection between him and this woman? And why had she left him such a message? His curiosity was piqued, but so was his confusion. He hadn't been expecting this kind of reaction, and now he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something that might change his life in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. 2 stories. 2 separate lives. But in a world full of chaos and uncertainty, where acts of kindness sometimes seem few and far between, these 2 lives were about to become inexplicably intertwined. How they would connect, though, was still a mystery. And neither Melania nor the teenager could have known just how their paths were destined to cross. But one thing was clear, the journey they were about to take was far from over. As the hours passed, the weight of the morning's encounter began to settle in on Melania. She found herself lost in thought as she sat in the small cafe, the boy sitting across from her, awkwardly picking at the bread she had bought for him. He was quiet, his eyes never fully meeting hers, still unsure of who she was and what her intentions were. Melania couldn't blame him. After all, who would trust someone they barely knew, especially in the world he had grown up in? She sipped her coffee, her mind racing. There were too many questions left unanswered. Who was this boy? Where was his family? And how had he ended up in such a dire situation? She glanced at him again. His hoodie, once bright but now faded and fraying at the edges, seemed to tell a story of its own. He had been through hardships far beyond his years. Melania could see it in the way he held himself, guarded, as if the world had taught him that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. It was clear now that this wasn't just about helping him get a meal or offering a momentary respite. She knew she had to find a way to help him in the long term, to make sure he didn't slip through the cracks like so many others. But how? Her mind wandered to the contacts she had: social workers, organizations that helped homeless children, foundations that supported youth in need. But would any of them help him? Or would he be passed along from one place to the next, just another nameless face in a system that didn't always care? Before she could get too lost in her thoughts, the boy looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. There was a flicker of something in them: uncertainty, fear, maybe even a little hope. Do you have kids? He asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the soft hum of the cafe. Melania blinked, surprised by the question. She hadn't expected him to open up so suddenly. But there it was, a vulnerable moment, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. She nodded slowly. Yes, she replied, her voice softening. I do. I have a son. His eyes flickered, as if trying to process the information. How do you know they'll be okay? The question was so raw, so full of the fear he had likely carried with him for so long, that it took Melania's breath away. She paused for a moment, her mind searching for the right words. How could she explain the complexity of being a mother, the endless worry, the constant struggle to do right by your children, when this boy didn't even know where his next meal was coming from? I don't always know, she said after a beat. But I try my best. I try to be there for them, no matter what. I think that's all we can do. The boy nodded, but it was clear he wasn't convinced. He wasn't sure that trying your best was enough when the world seemed so stacked against him. And that hit Melania hard. She wanted to reassure him, to tell him that everything would be okay, but she couldn't make that promise. Not in a world that had failed so many others before him. She took a deep breath. I know things seem tough right now, she said, her voice firm yet gentle. But you don't have to face them alone. I'm here to help. And there are people who want to help you too. You don't have to go through this by yourself. The boy's eyes flashed with a brief, almost imperceptible spark of hope, but it quickly faded, replaced by the familiar wall he had built around himself. He didn't want to believe her, not yet. Trust was something he couldn't afford to give, not after everything he'd been through. Meanwhile, across town, the teenager with the crumpled note was still staring at the words written on the small piece of paper. He had gone over them 100 times, trying to understand the full meaning behind them. You just saved my life, the note had said. But how? He had only given up his seat. It wasn't a grand gesture, it wasn't anything worth writing home about. And yet, here was this woman, a stranger, thanking him as if he had changed the course of her life. The $100 bill tucked inside the note felt heavier than the paper itself. It was almost like a symbol of something greater, something more profound than just a random act of kindness. And as much as he tried to brush it off, he couldn't shake the feeling that this woman was part of something bigger, a story, a situation he couldn't yet fully comprehend. But what could he do? He was just a teenager, living his own life, struggling to get by like so many others. He wasn't anyone special. And yet, this note made him feel like he was standing at the edge of something life-changing. He wanted to reach out, to find this woman and thank her, to tell her that he didn't do anything extraordinary. But as he thought about it more, he realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something much bigger than one small act of kindness. What if, somehow, this woman's life was intertwined with his? What if this note was more than just a thank you? What if it was a sign that his life was about to change in ways he could never have predicted? The more he thought about it, the more he felt a sense of urgency. He needed to figure out who this woman was, why she had reached out to him in such a way, and what had led her to give him that note. But that meant digging deeper, pushing past the uncertainty and fear that had always kept him on the sidelines. It meant risking something, trusting that he could make a difference in his own life by understanding the people around him. But could he? Could he really take that first step into a world that, for so long, had felt so foreign to him? As the day wore on, the tension between the boy in the cafe and the teenager on the subway continued to build, each of them standing at the threshold of a decision that could alter the course of their lives. They didn't know it yet, but their fates were tied together in ways they could never have imagined. For now, though, the mystery remained unsolved. Who was the boy? Why had the woman left the note? And how, in the end, would their lives come to intersect in ways that none of them could predict? The answers were out there waiting to be discovered, but for now, the questions lingered, building the kind of suspense that could only come from a story yet to unfold. The days passed in a haze of unanswered questions and growing uncertainty. For Melania, the boy's presence lingered in her thoughts, haunting her even when she was supposed to be focusing on other things. She tried to reach out to the authorities, the social workers who could help find him a safe place, but each attempt felt like it was met with more red tape, more hesitation. It was clear that there was no easy solution, no quick fix to the boy's situation. The system, as always, was slow and impersonal. She knew the help he needed wasn't coming fast enough. She needed to take matters into her own hands. She spent hours trying to connect with organizations that could offer him a home, a future, anything to get him off the streets. But every conversation, every call, every email left her with more doubts. Was it enough to simply help him get a meal? Was it enough to just give him shelter for one night? Or did she need to do more? The boy, who had so briefly allowed himself to trust her, had become a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. He didn't ask for much, just the bare minimum, but even that was more than he seemed willing to accept. Each day, he withdrew a little further, retreating into the same silence that had first greeted her on the morning they met. Melans had thought she understood the weight of his situation, but now, as the days dragged on, it became clear that there were layers to his pain that even she couldn't begin to comprehend. She had reached out to him, offered him help, but there was always that distance. That invisible barrier he refused to let anyone cross. Her gut told her that she wasn't getting the full story, but she wasn't sure what was holding him back from opening up. Was it pride? Shame? Fear? Whatever it was, it kept him from revealing the truth behind why he was out there, alone in the world, trying to survive one more night. Meanwhile, the teenager who had received the mysterious note found himself in a similar spiral of confusion and anticipation. He couldn't get the note out of his head. The simple words, the thanks, the cryptic mention of saving someone's life, what did it all mean? He hadn't expected to become a part of someone else's story just by giving up his seat on the subway. Yet here he was, unable to move forward, unable to let go of the feeling that something much bigger was unfolding around him. He tried to move on, but life had a way of pulling him back. Every street corner, every passing face, every moment felt connected to the woman in the subway car. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that there was a connection between them, something unspoken, something beyond the brief encounter they'd shared. He had to find her. He had to know who she was and why she had left him that note. But even as he told himself that, he knew the odds of tracking her down were slim. The world was full of people, and he was just one teenager. Yet, that sense of urgency inside him kept pushing him forward. There was something in his gut that told him this wasn't just about a chance encounter, it was about fate, about destiny. He had never been the kind of person to believe in those things. But this felt different. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been given a sign, a message that he couldn't ignore. The days went on, and the tension between the boy and Melania continued to simmer beneath the surface. He seemed to be slipping further and further away from her grasp, his trust remaining elusive. Each time she tried to engage him, to offer him something more, he would retreat deeper into himself, as if her kindness was just another reminder of how alone he truly was. She couldn't help but wonder if she was making things worse. Was she pushing him too hard? Was it too soon to expect him to open up? And then, one evening, as the sky darkened and the city hummed with life, something happened. Melania's phone buzzed, interrupting the silence in her office. It was an anonymous text. No name, no number, just a simple message: "I know where he is. I can help. But you need to act fast." Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, 1,000 questions running through her mind. Who was this person? How did they know about the boy? Was this the break she had been waiting for? She immediately responded, but there was no reply. Just silence. The message hung in the air, its urgency impossible to ignore. Melania quickly grabbed her coat and headed out. She wasn't sure where she was going or who she was meeting, but she couldn't waste any more time. If there was a chance to help the boy, she had to take it. As she stepped into the car, her phone buzzed again, this time with an address. It was a rundown part of the city, an area she had been advised to avoid. But this wasn't about safety anymore. This was about finding him, about doing something to break through the wall he had built around himself. In a different part of the city, the teenager had followed a similar path of uncertainty. After days of obsessing over the note, he finally made the decision to seek out the woman. It was madness, he knew that. But something deep within him told him that this was his moment, that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. He had found the address, an old, nondescript building near the edge of town. His heart pounded as he stood in front of it, uncertain of what he would find. Was this where she lived? Or was this where everything would unravel? The same feeling of urgency tugged at him, pulling him toward the door. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what he might discover, but he knew he had to go in. Whatever this was, it was bigger than him. And then, as the sun set and the lights of the city flickered on, fate seemed to twist in ways neither Melania nor the teenager could have predicted. Their paths were about to converge. But would it be in time? Would they make the right choices? Or would the shadows of their doubts pull them apart forever? The mystery was building, the tension mounting, but the resolution was still out of reach. Something was about to break, something was about to change, but no one knew how or when. Every step brought them closer to the truth. Every moment carried them toward a confrontation that neither of them could avoid. The answers they both needed were just out of reach, hanging in the balance. And with each passing second, the tension grew thicker. As Melania approached the address, her heart pounded in her chest. The building loomed ahead, worn and weathered, a shadow of the city's forgotten corners. She didn't know who had sent the text or what exactly she was walking into, but something told her this was her last chance to make a difference in the boy's life. She had no backup, no plan beyond reaching him before it was too late. She walked up the cracked sidewalk, her footsteps echoing against the silence of the street. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt wrong. She checked the address once more, then looked up at the building's dilapidated exterior. It felt off, like a trap waiting to be sprung. The darkness of the evening seemed to close in on her, heightening the sense of unease that had already settled in her stomach. With each step closer to the entrance, the weight of the unknown pressed harder on her. Was this really the right decision? She had been told this could help, that this was the moment she had been waiting for. But now that she was here, standing in front of this rundown building, doubts began to creep in. She shook them off and stepped inside. The door creaked open with a low groan, revealing a narrow hallway dimly lit by a flickering light overhead. The air inside felt stale, thick with years of neglect. She hesitated, but the urgency pushed her forward. There had been no word since the cryptic text, no indication of who was on the other side of that door. As she moved deeper into the building, her eyes strained to see through the gloom. A faint rustling noise echoed from one of the rooms, followed by a soft voice. It was him, the boy. But something was different now. The voice that had once been filled with uncertainty, tinged with fear, was now laced with something darker. Anger. Desperation. Melania's heart skipped a beat. "Is anyone there?" she called out, trying to sound confident, though her voice wavered slightly. The tension in the air thickened. A shadow shifted in the distance, and a figure stepped out into the dim light. It wasn't the boy. It was a man tall, with dark eyes that seemed to absorb the light around him. His presence was imposing, his demeanor cold. "I don't think you're supposed to be here," he said, his voice low and steady. The words felt like a warning, But there was something in his tone that made Melania's blood run cold. She tried to steady herself. "I'm looking for someone. A boy. He's in trouble. He needs help." The man's eyes narrowed. "There's no boy here. You should leave." But Melania wasn't about to give up now. She couldn't. Not when she had come so far. "I know he's here. I was told he was. I just want to help him." The man's lips curled into a faint, almost mocking smile. "Help him? You don't understand what's going on here." He stepped closer, blocking her path, and for a moment, she felt the weight of something ominous in his words. "You're too late. This isn't a place for saving people, lady. This is where people come to disappear." Her heart skipped again. Something wasn't right. She had to get out of there, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. She couldn't move, not yet. Not without knowing more. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The sudden sound startled her, breaking the tension in the air, and she quickly pulled it out, hoping for something that could make sense of all this. But it wasn't the text she was expecting. It was a voicemail. And the name attached to it made her stomach twist. It was from the boy. She hadn't heard from him since their meeting. With trembling fingers, she pressed play. The voice that came through was shaky, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to get hurt. They're watching. They're always watching. You need to leave. You need to go now before they..." The message cut off abruptly. A chill ran down her spine. She looked up at the man, who was still standing there, unmoving. His eyes were cold, calculating. Melania knew something had gone terribly wrong. The boy was in more danger than she had thought. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice stronger now, more forceful. She couldn't back down. "What's happening here?" The man's smile faded, his eyes darkening. "You don't know what you've walked into. But you will soon enough." Before Melania could respond, she heard footsteps from behind her, rapid, heavy, and approaching fast. Panic surged in her chest as she spun around, only to find the boy standing there, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He looked different now. There was something about him that seemed more guarded, more wary. "I told you to leave," the man growled, his voice taking on an edge. "Now it's too late." The boy stepped forward, shaking his head, his voice barely a whisper. "They were never going to let me go, Melania. Not after what I saw." "What do you mean?" Melania asked, her voice barely above a breath. "What's going on?" The boy's eyes flickered with fear as he looked at the man, then back at her. "You don't understand. They've been following me for a long time. They'll follow you now, too. They won't stop. You have to leave." But it was too late. The man lunged forward, grabbing the boy by the arm and jerking him back. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled. "Not until we've finished what we started." Melania's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, instinctively trying to put distance between herself and the escalating danger. But her mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. What had this boy gotten himself involved in? What was the real story? She needed answers, but she wasn't sure if she could trust the boy now. He had been hiding something all along, and she couldn't help but wonder if he had known all this time what kind of world he was caught in. The boy struggled, but the man's grip was too tight. Melania's instincts screamed at her to help, but what could she do? She was just one person. And the danger that loomed in this dark, forgotten corner of the city was bigger than either of them had anticipated. As the boy's muffled cries echoed through the empty hall, Melania's mind raced with a single terrifying thought. There was more to this story than she had ever imagined. And the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it was becoming. Would she be able to save him? Or had she walked into something far darker than she could have prepared for? The tension in the air was palpable. Melania's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the man tighten his grip on the boy's arm, pulling him backward with a force that made the boy wince in pain. Every instinct in her screamed for her to act, but the danger that loomed before her seemed overwhelming. She had to do something, but what? She couldn't fight him alone. She didn't know who this man was, or how far this went. The boy's eyes locked with hers, his gaze filled with a mix of fear and desperation. He mouthed something, but the words were inaudible. His struggles only seemed to provoke the man further. The air between them was charged with an energy that felt almost like an explosion waiting to happen. "You should have stayed away," the man hissed, his voice low and threatening. "But now you've made your choice." Melania didn't know where the courage came from, but suddenly she was moving. She stepped forward, trying to put herself between the boy and the man. "Let him go," she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever you're doing, it's not too late to stop." The man's eyes flicked to her, and for a moment, there was a flash of something, recognition, maybe. Something in his expression shifted, and for the briefest second, it felt like he was hesitating. But the hesitation didn't last long. His grip tightened even more. "Don't you get it?" he spat. "This is bigger than you. It's bigger than both of us." The boy's voice cut through the rising tension, barely a whisper but laced with urgency. "Melania, he's not who he says he is. He's part of something else, something dangerous." The man shot him a venomous glare, his face twisting into a sneer. "You're a fool, boy. You never should have tried to run. You never should have trusted anyone." Melania's mind raced, trying to piece the puzzle together. The boy had been hiding something all along, but she never expected this. Whatever this man was, whatever they were involved in, it was far darker than she could have imagined. She felt her stomach churn, the weight of the situation sinking in. Suddenly, without warning, the man released his grip on the boy, pushing him roughly toward the wall. The boy stumbled but managed to stay on his feet, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Melania didn't have time to process what was happening. She darted toward the boy, pulling him behind her protectively. "Run," she urged him in a low, frantic whisper. "Now." But just as they turned to flee, the man stepped forward, blocking their path with a quickness that took them both by surprise. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled, his voice sharp and filled with malice. And then, everything happened at once. The boy, still trembling from the confrontation, suddenly took a step forward. His voice, though shaky, rang out with a quiet power. "You don't understand," he said, his words carrying a weight Melania hadn't heard before. "You're not the one in control anymore." In a split second, the boy did something that completely stunned Melania. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a black rectangular object that looked like an old-school key fob. Without a second thought, he pressed a button on it, and the entire building seemed to tremble. The man's expression faltered, his eyes widening with a mix of shock and realization. "No. No, this can't be happening." He took a step back, as if the ground was slipping from under him. "What did you do?" Melania demanded, her voice rising with panic. She had no idea what was happening, but the sudden shift in the air was undeniable. The man now seemed panicked, his earlier confidence crumbling. The boy began, but his voice faltered as the building groaned, the walls seeming to shake with a low, ominous rumble. "I never wanted this to go this far. But I had to." Before Melania could react, the man lunged at the boy, but this time, the boy didn't hesitate. In one swift movement, he pressed another button, and the building seemed to collapse inward. The walls cracked, and the floor beneath their feet shifted as if something beneath the building was awakening. "Get out of here," the boy urged, grabbing Melania's hand and pulling her toward the exit. They ran, the ground shaking with every step they took, the sound of collapsing debris ringing in their ears. The man's frantic shouts echoed behind them, but they didn't dare look back. They burst through the door just as the building seemed to buckle under its own weight. The street outside was bathed in the dim glow of streetlights, but the night was far from calm. The distant wail of sirens filled the air, and Melania's breath came in short, panicked gasps. But as they reached the safety of the street, the boy stopped. His eyes flicked back toward the building, his expression grim. "It's not over. It's only just begun." Melania turned to him, her chest heaving. "What was that? What did you just do?" He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." He took a long, shuddering breath. "There's more at play here than you think. That man, he was only the beginning." Before she could respond, his words cut through the air like a blade. "The life-changing note you gave me, it wasn't just a thank you. It was a warning. And the only way out of this now is to follow the path we started on." Melania stared at him, trying to process the weight of his words, the the gravity of the situation. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, she felt something cold and sharp against her back, a hand gripping her shoulder with a force that made her blood run cold. Her heart stopped. The boy's eyes widened in horror as he turned to face her, his face drained of all color. "You really thought you could run?" The voice behind her was unmistakable. The same man, now standing behind her, a sinister grin playing on his lips. But this time, he wasn't alone. Several figures emerged from the shadows, all of them wearing the same cold, empty expressions. Melania's mind raced as she realized the truth. The game was only just beginning, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. The pressure against Melania's back was suffocating. She could feel the coldness of the man's grip, and the realization hit her like a wave: there was no escape. She had been so sure that she was getting closer to the truth, but in that moment, everything seemed to fall apart. The boy, now standing beside her, looked as if he had just realized the full scope of what they were up against. His face was pale, his body tense, and his eyes filled with a sense of helplessness that mirrored her own. The man behind her chuckled darkly. "You think you've figured it all out, don't you? You think you can just walk in and save the day. But you're way out of your depth, both of you." Melania swallowed hard. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking slightly. She wasn't sure if she was asking about the man or about the entire situation, but she needed answers, real ones. "What's going on here? What's this all about?" The man's grip loosened slightly, and he let out a breath as if considering her words. Then, with an eerie calm, he answered, "You really have no idea, do you? It's not just about the boy. It's never been about him. It's about control. It's about power. And you've just become part of something much bigger than you can comprehend." Melania felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Power," she repeated, almost to herself. She turned to the boy, who was now trembling beside her. What did he mean? What's going on? The boy met her eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to be part of this. I didn't ask for any of it. But they pulled me in. They know things. Things no one should know." The man behind them scoffed. "It's not like you had a choice. None of you did." He stepped around Melania, circling her like a predator. "The things we know, the things we control, it's all part of a bigger plan. And the boy, he's just the key." The boy flinched at the man's words, and Melania's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. It was clear now that everything was connected, but the truth was still slipping through her fingers, just out of reach. What kind of plan was he talking about? And how was this boy involved? She had to understand, she had to make sense of it all, or none of this would matter. Without warning, the man gestured for the other figures to step forward. They moved like shadows, their expressions unreadable. Melania instinctively took a step back, positioning herself protectively in front of the boy. But the man just smirked. "They won't help you," he said. "You're not even a part of this game. You never were." The boy's breathing was shallow, and he seemed to be retreating into himself, the fear overwhelming him. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't want to drag you into this. I really didn't." Melania looked at him, her heart aching for the boy, for his fear, for everything he had been through. She understood now. This wasn't just about saving him, it was about uncovering the truth, about stopping something much bigger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The man's eyes narrowed. "There's no stopping it now. You've seen too much. You've heard too much." His voice was ice cold, and the finality of his words sent a shiver through her. "And if you don't leave now, there will be no way out for either of you." Melania's mind raced, but she refused to let fear control her. She couldn't back down now, not after everything. She turned to the boy, her hand reaching for his. "We have to trust each other," she said, her voice steady, even though her heart was hammering in her chest. "I don't know everything, but I know we have to fight." The boy's gaze softened for a moment, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "I'm scared," he whispered. "But I'm not giving up. I can't." Without another word, they both turned toward the man and the figures standing in the shadows. The tension in the air was thick, but something in Melania's chest sparked a fire that pushed her forward. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions any longer. The man smirked, clearly expecting them to back down, but he hadn't counted on the strength they had found in each other. "You think you can take us down?" he mocked. "You're out of your depth." But as the words left his lips, something shifted. There was a sudden movement from the shadows, a blur of motion. One of the figures stepped forward, their face now illuminated in the dim light. It was a woman older, with sharp features, and a gaze that was both calculating and resolute. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "It's over." The man's expression twisted in confusion, but before he could react, the woman stepped forward, and with a swift motion, she disabled the devices the man and his associates were carrying. The eerie silence that had filled the air was replaced by a hum of disconnection. The man's smirk faded, his eyes widening in realization. He began, but his words faltered. The woman turned to Melania and the boy, her eyes softening. "I'm sorry for all the confusion," she said. "We never meant for you to get involved. But it's too late to turn back now." Melania felt a surge of confusion mixed with relief. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "Who are you? And what is all of this?" The woman sighed, her face tired but resolute. "I'm someone who's been trying to fix the damage done by people like him." She gestured to the man, who was now standing still, his expression dark and furious. "The boy, his knowledge was meant to be a key. But the people we're dealing with, they don't play by the same rules. It's all about control. They've been manipulating people, pulling them in, keeping secrets that should never have been hidden." Melania's mind raced, piecing the fragments together. So this was about more than just saving him? It was about stopping them? The woman nodded. "Yes. But it's not over yet. There are still pieces in motion, and even though we've stopped them for now, the fight isn't finished." The man, still recovering from the surprise, glared at the woman. "You won't get away with this. You think you've won? You have no idea what you're up against." The woman stepped closer to Melania and the boy, her voice calm but firm. "It's over for you. We've neutralized the threat." She paused, looking at the boy. "And you'll be safe. For now." The boy, still in shock from everything that had happened, looked up at her. "Safe? How can I be safe after all of this?" "You'll be free," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's not the life you wanted, but you can make a new start. You don't have to be part of their game anymore." Melania could see the flicker of hope return in the boy's eyes, but the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be recovery, rebuilding, and figuring out how to live after everything that had happened. But the first step toward a new life had begun. The man, defeated and cornered, was escorted away by the other figures. The battle was over, for now. But Melania knew that the ripples of what had happened would continue to be felt for a long time. There was so much more to uncover, so much more that had yet to come to light. But for now, she had helped change the boy's fate. She had fought for him, and for that, she could find peace. As the last of the figures disappeared into the shadows, Melania turned to the boy, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "You're going to be okay," she said, her voice soft but firm. He nodded, his eyes still wide with the weight of everything that had happened. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "You don't have to," she replied. "We're in this together. And that's all that matters." And with that, the first real step toward healing began. The boy had been saved, and Melania had found the strength to help him through courage, determination, and a willingness to face the unknown. The story wasn't over, but it was a new chapter. A chapter where, together, they would find a way forward.